Mel B, Mel C, Jerry, Victoria and Emma, also known as the Spice Girls, are back on tour. So I just want to take some time to reflect on the success of the Spice Girls. Hey guys, welcome back to What's Poppin'. So today I want to talk about the Spice Girls and kind of reflect on the success they had over the 7 to 8 year period between 94 and 2001, 2002. Over the course of those years, they spanned 3 albums, and with that, there was a lot of success that came behind it. So let's jump straight into the video. So the Spice Girls initially formed in 1994. As I mentioned, there were 5 members of the band. So Mel B, Mel C, Jerry, Victoria and Emma, also known as Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, Ginger Spice, Posh Spice and Baby Spice. Now I think the thing that really separated the Spice Girls from other bands at the time were the fact that each of the 5 members had their own individual and unique personalities, not just in terms of obviously their names, but how they dressed, how they sang, their persona. And I think that really set them apart from the other bands in the 90s. I think obviously the fact they were all females and they were really celebrating girl power, which was something at the time, even in the mid-90s, we weren't as progressive as we are today in terms of gender equality and equal rights and things like that. And I think the Spice Girls really started those types of conversations when it came to female empowerment and gender equality as well. So initially they were signed to Virgin Records and they released their debut single Wannabe. Now this single alone reached number 1 in 37 different countries. So if we just take a minute to think about that for a second, being number 1 in 37 different countries around the world is a really big deal, even for today's numbers. So it was really clear from the outset that there was demand for this type of sound and from this girl band as well. They went on to release their debut album called Spice, which sold more than 31 million copies worldwide, and it's become the biggest selling album by a female group in history, and the group still hold that title today. So thinking back to when the album was released back in 96, they still hold that title today. So even after all that time's passed, all these different bands have released their tracks and their albums, they are still the best. It's still the best selling album by a female group in history, which is a massive achievement. And it's clear why that there's such a demand now for the Spice Girls, and obviously they've gone on tour and it's sold out and they've released more tickets. There's clearly demand for all of that, and obviously it started all the way back then. Interestingly as well, in the UK, the album Spice is the 18th biggest selling album of all time. So in the whole of the UK charts, Spice is the 18th biggest selling album. So again, that's a massive achievement, and even though it was released back in 96, to still be in the top 20 shows how big they were at the time. And I remember being back in the 90s obviously, and when you think of 90s culture, 90s fashion, definitely Spice Girls were at the centre of a lot of that. How they dressed, the platform shoes, the bright colours, the in-your-face attitude. It was very uncommon in the 90s for people to be as outspoken as they are today, but the Spice Girls, again, really started that type of conversation, and I think it's something that's kind of stayed within the industry, and I'll talk a bit more about that later in the video. In terms of my favourite tracks from this particular album, it was mainly the singles. I wasn't really into the Spice Girls at this point, if I'm honest. So it was mainly Wannabe that I really liked, To Become One, Say You'll Be There, Who Do You Think You Are. All of these singles were obviously released from the album. So I wasn't really, like I said, into them at this point, but I knew of them and I knew the songs, and they were quite fun, all very pop songs. I remember To Become One being being quite controversial for the time, just because it was quite a sexualized song. And even now, I mean, when you listen to it, it's nothing compared to the lyrics that we have nowadays. But again, back in the 90s, things were a little bit more conservative. People weren't as outspoken, particularly when it came to music and movies and things like that. So even the kind of thought or talk of sex was a bit taboo still at the time. So I do remember the controversy around that song as well. The Spice Girls then released their follow-up album Spiceworld, and this is when I really got into the band and into the group. And that album Spiceworld sold over 20 million copies worldwide. I'm aware they had a video game, they also had the movie, which helped to kind of catapult them to international status at this point. The Spice Girls in total have sold more than 85 million records worldwide, which includes the first 3 albums that they released, so Spiceworld and Forever. Now, out of the 3, Forever was my favourite album, but I'll get to that in a moment. Singles from Spiceworld that I really liked, so Spice Up Your Life, and this is, like I said, when I first got into the Spice Girls. So I remember being in HMV. For those of you that are from the UK wouldn't obviously know what HMV is. So it's a record store where people used to go and buy CDs and vinyls and video games, etc. But I remember being in HMV and seeing the videos. So they used to play the videos back then in the store. And I remember thinking, okay, who's this? And it was a very dystopian kind of futuristic video. And obviously it was Spice Up Your Life. So I then went back and kind of listened to a lot of their music and really got into it from there. But I really like the message of Spice Up Your Life. It's very fun, it's very out there, it's almost like taking control of your life and having fun. And I really like the message from that song. I also like Stop, so it was a little bit more of a 60s inspired or 70s inspired song, very pop song, but it was a really cool song to listen to. I really liked the song Too Much. This was more of a slower jam for the Spice Girls. I think from memory it was released around Christmas time, if I'm not mistaken. But I really like the song, love the video. I also like the Soul Shock and Carlin mix, so if you haven't heard that, check that one out. It's a little bit more of an R&B style take on the song, but I like that. And then there was also an album track called Saturday Night Divas, which was also quite a fun song, reminded more of the first album when I heard it, but I really like that song as well. Then the girls kind of went through a bit of change at this point. So it was after this album that Jerry, Ginger Spice, decided to leave the band. And I've heard different stories as to why Jerry left. Part of it was due to the infighting between the girls. Part of it was that Jerry was jealous of Mel B. I've heard loads of different stories as to why they left, or why she left, sorry. Obviously they've clearly made up as she's now back with the group, but I remember it being a really big deal at the time, and Jerry kind of went on to her own solo success. Particularly in the first part of her solo career, she had massive success after that, and I think a lot of that was attributed to the fact she was part of the Spice Girls. But Jerry left, like I said. The group also decided to go to more of a maturer sounding style of music, which ultimately I don't think helped the band, if I'm honest. As I said, Forever was my favourite album, but that's just because, you know, I was very much a 90s R&B kid, and that this album Forever lended itself a lot more to that style of music. So he worked a lot with Darkchild, for example, who produced for Brandy. So there was a few more kind of R&B style producers that they were working with. They changed their look, so they weren't as in bright colours. Obviously, we know we're talking about 2000, 2001. So the style of music and the style of fashion changed. So I remember they were very much in leather, and it was more about them being adults. And I just don't think it connected so much with their core audience. But the album itself sold 5 million copies, which compared to the previous albums was quite minimal, but obviously 5 million copies is nothing to, shy away from. So in December 2000, the group themselves unofficially kind of announced that they were going to be separating. So they didn't say they were splitting up, and they always remained by saying that, they would always be the Spice Girls, a little bit like how Destiny's Child have quote unquote split up. They've never officially said that they're disbanded. but they've clearly gone on for an indefinite amount of time to release their own projects or concentrate on being mothers or having families, etc. But they always maintained that they were the Spice Girls, and since recently they've kind of come back to say, prove the point that they have been the Spice Girls. They've remained together in some form. It's never really been the five of them apart from the Olympics, but other than that, it's always been without Jerry or now without Victoria. So it's quite interesting to see that they can still move on and evolve a little bit like Take That as a four-piece. So it's going to be interesting to see if and what they do from this success as well. So coming back to the Forever album, so they only released 2 tracks from this album, which was Holla and Let Love Lead the Way. Holla for me was really when I thought the Spice Girls were at the pinnacle of their career. Now obviously some people would argue very differently with that, because a lot of people relate to the pop side of Spice Girls, which was mainly the first 2 albums. But as I said, I'm more of an R&B. I prefer Dark Child. So for me, this is when I really thought they were going to go off to have massive success. But I really loved Holla. There's also a song called Right Back At Ya, which I really liked. My favourite ever Spice Girls song, which was called Wasting My Time, which was just an album track. It was never released. Interestingly though, when I listened to that song, I can't identify Mel B's voice. So I can only hear Victoria, Emma and Mel C. So if anybody knows if Mel B is on that track, or if I'm just missing it, or if you just want to correct me, please comment below. But always when I listen to Wasting My Time, I can never ever identify Mel B singing on that, which I found interesting. And then the final track, which I really liked, was called Groove With Me. So again, more kind of pop / R&B related tracks, which really stood out to me on that album. As I mentioned, the group, they later reformed in 2007, and they had a single called Headlines, Friendship Never Ends. This song particularly wasn't for me. I think anything after the Forever album has just never caught on with me. I know they released a track called Voodoo, then Jem kind of went off and released her own stuff, but it's just never really caught on. And I've noticed with this tour, from what I've heard and seen, they've not performed any new music, or they've not hinted at anything. I think they may be considering releasing new music off the back of the success of the tour, and I think there's definitely a demand for that. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see whether or not after the tour's wrapped up, whether they do release new music. So that's going to be quite interesting. So back in 2007, as I mentioned, the group came back, and that tour itself produced 107.2 million ticket sales and merchandise. There was a lot of ad deals, a lot of sponsors, because everyone obviously knows the weight that the Spice Girls name carries. So it's quite interesting to kind of see that even in 2007, the demand was still there for that. Now, the Spice Girls themselves, I would say, kind of pioneered a change in music, especially when it came to females, and you could almost say that a lot of the 90s girl bands, particularly in the UK, came off the back of the Spice Girls. So bands like All Saints, Bewitched, Atomic Kitten, Girls Aloud, Sugar Babes, really kind of had a lot of success, and can be attributed to the fact that the Spice Girls led the way from that point of view. And even international groups such as the Pussycat Dolls, Girls' Generation, Little Mix, Fifth Harmony, all of these girl bands have been worldwide. But again, you can link a lot of their success back to the Spice Girls. So as I said, it's really interesting to see that now in 2019 they've come back. They announced that they were going to be on tour from last year, and that started to build up a lot of hype. And obviously now they've done a few shows, so they've played in Dublin, Manchester. I think they may be in London this weekend, I'm not sure, but I know they're doing commentary next week. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see what happens after this. I know initially from the Dublin reviews, they put on a great show, but there were some issues around the sound quality. I didn't hear anything about that from the Manchester Trafford Centre, and it's going to be interesting to see if the Rico sounds like that as well. But because I will be going to see the Spice Girls next week. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see what the sound is like from that. But I'm really excited to go and see the girls. It's going to really take me back to the mid to late 90s. Obviously, they'll be performing some of their greatest hits. I'm really hoping they do touch on some of the later songs, so Holler and things like that. But it's going to be a bit strange to see them without Victoria there. I do feel as though it's going to be a bit weird kind of seeing somebody else sing Victoria's parts. But then on the flip side, I guess you could say that about Jerry, because for example with Holler, she was never there, so I suppose if they do perform that song, she might do Victoria's parts. I'm just guessing at this point, but it's going to be interesting to see how that all works out. Even though Victoria's not going to be there, I think, she doesn't need the money. And a lot of people have stated that, she can't sing and she doesn't really add much to the group. But she clearly has an element within that group, because everyone's saying it's odd that she's not there. They're going to miss her being there. So she has got a presence in the group. And like I said, while she doesn't need the money, I think it would be nice to kind of see her performing, because I can't imagine that the girls would be singing and touring much after this, if I'm honest. A lot of them are in their late 30s or their 40s. So at this point, they've all got families and their own careers. How feasible is it that they're going to go back on a worldwide tour in, say, 2-3 years after they've gone back in the studio, released an album, done some promo, and then gone back on tour? So I'm really hoping that Victoria does some sort of surprise appearance, maybe in London, or for the final show, wherever that's going to be. I just think it would be a nice way to kind of close the show, and really kind of thank the fans for coming along. And also I think it would kind of get people pumped again. So if they were going to go back into the studio for a fourth album, then certainly that would be a really good way to do that as well. So like I said, I'll be open to new music, but as I said, I think this probably will be their last tour. So as I mentioned, I'll be going to the Spice Girls next week, so I'll be doing a follow-up to this video either next week or next weekend. But then I'm also going to create a new series off the back of this, looking at each of the 5 Spice Girls solo career and what they've done during and post the Spice Girls era, and looking just a bit more detailing about that as well. So if you're interested in that, please give me a thumbs up, and also make a comment below as to who you'd like me to cover off first. So that's it from this episode today. I just wanted to kind of talk about what the Spice Girls had achieved during their career as a group, and kind of express my excitement for the tour, and then obviously just let you know about my plans for the 5-part series coming from next weekend as well. So have you been to the tour? And if you have, let me know in the comments below what you thought, and if you're going to see them, are you excited, and what are your favourite songs from the Spice Girls over the years, and what videos have been your favourites as well. So that's it for this time, guys. I will speak to you next time. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the like button, and also hit the share button as well, and hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. I'll speak to you next time, guys. Thanks, bye.
I know that everybody's somebody.